Thank you so much, Mark, for that introduction. And it's a really great privilege to be here today. And I don't stand here as the privileged academic who just has cognitive knowledge and qualifications. I'm someone here who's been impacted personally through addiction. And in fact, when I was born underweight, less than 5 pounds, due to my mum's tobacco addiction. And she smoked so much during her pregnancy with myself that I was born with a cleft palate. So my lip was actually cut. I had to have immediate surgery when I was born. And addiction continued in my family. Various different members of the family, not all of whom are with us today, unfortunately. And grew up in a household where alcohol and domestic violence went hand in hand. So for me, I'm very passionate about the issues that I speak about. It's not just a job as to why I'm here today. So, and I also come from the northeast, where I am. And it's interesting talking about stigma, because actually as I became an academic, I was told to lose my accent. Because of course, educated people don't talk like people from the northeast, do they? And I was told that my hair was too short, and I had to grow my hair, because I used to have a very short, grade 1 haircut. So the message was, you've got to look like us and sound like us. And that was still goes on today, unfortunately. And that's one of the reasons behind New Central Media, which is a publishing house that was set up in partnership with Recovery Connections. So for me, I was very passionate and keen that this new publishing house is located within Aliyah Road, within that lived experience recovery organisation. And for me, growing up in the northeast, from a council estate, every house, every street began with the letter H on my estate. And so it was known back in the day as Prisoner Cell Block H Estate. For some people old enough in the room to remember that Australian prison drama. So it was that bad. And of course the narrative is, for Middlesbrough, it's one of the worst places to live in the UK for violence, crime rates, educational attainment, you name it. And so to go to the local comp from that council estate, the carried shame I had was incredible, with all of the family dysfunction co-occurring. And then at school, for English set, I was in the bottom set for all of my subjects for the first 3 years of secondary school. And told by the English teacher that I wasn't bright enough to study Shakespeare, so I was put in the class to study Boys from the Black Stuff. So it was with great delight many years later to go back and say, actually, I've got first class honours and a doctorate, and currently working at Cambridge University. And so, growing up in the northeast of England, and hearing all of those narratives about not only the geographic location, the poverty, and the disadvantaged people from these poor communities, then when having family members who then had all of these negative labels, which I thought we so powerfully saw this morning in that first drama sequence of the labels being put on. But growing up in that environment with family members living that living hell, I knew there was a different story. Because there was the things that I was seeing was the strength and the power, the tenacity, the resilience of those people. And so when they're being labelled as marginalised, as vulnerable, I was thinking, but do you not know them? Because the people that I saw and the way I saw them operating and moving in the world was different to these labels that were being attached to them. And so if we just move to the next slide, I'm married to a Ghanaian heritage. Rosie, my wife, family's originally from Ghana. And this is an African proverb, which really is the foundation of New Central Media. And it says this: until the lion learns how to write, every story will glorify the hunter. And I believe there's so much of what we've been hearing today about the stigma that everyone who's so powerfully presented is actually, you face those experiences because the hunter's story is dominating the narrative. And we're here to change that domination of the narrative. That every person who's willing to stand up and share your data, it's not just your story. This is a living embodiment of what works in recovery. And we keep, as academics going, where's the hard data, where's the hard evidence? It's in the room. We've seen it being presented at the front of this room today. And if anyone is ill thought to think that hard data is expressed in a percentage. I'm sorry, but you're wrong. And that's an associate professor telling you that. So for me, what the vision behind New Central Media is to decenter the hunter. And I include academia as part of the problem. Because what we've done is we've come along as the experts, as the people who can write the story. And for me, I'm someone who's never used an illegal drug. So I always find it really fascinating that I'm invited various places to speak as an expert on drugs, and I've never used one. And so everything I've learned about what works in addiction recovery is by sitting down, having a cup of tea with people, and listening. And then what you do is you go away after, you come along, do your surveys, do your interviews, you go away, write it all up, put it in the flouncy language of academia, because that's what we're told we have to do. We've got to use certain words in order to get it in the journals that are somehow deemed to be the right places for that knowledge to be produced and published, even though we know that at best about 12 people will ever read them. But that's this broken industry that I work in. That even though the knowledge that we gain has the power to change people's lives, we don't disseminate it in communities and in places like this. We have to go back to these archaic, elitist journals, and that's somehow deemed to be better. So New Central Media is challenging that. It wants to dismantle the way we produce knowledge. It's wanting to challenge who is seen as the knowledge producer. So it's no longer in the hands of academics, policymakers, the privileged, and the elite. And what I found so powerful through the curation, we've got 4 books that we're publishing over this next year. 2 will be released in March this year, the other 2 later in the year. The 4 books, one is on women's recovery pathways, because we know that recovery in the main is kind of gender blind in terms of the provision for women. Second book is on prisons, and we're asking the question, to what extent does prison help or hinder recovery? The third one is on Black and Asian recovery pathways, and the final one is interviewing CEOs of lived experience recovery organizations to find out what work they do, how they do it, and why it gets different results. And so it's been the most powerful, and it sounds cliche to say, but one of the most powerful things of my entire career. I've been in academia since 1998. I'm that old. Reading firsthand people's lived experience chapters. And we said, we don't want you to flounce it up, we don't want you to dress it up, we don't want you to use certain words that you wouldn't use. We're not interested where your commas are, we're not interested where the full stops are. Okay? If you swear, then please swear in the chapter. If that's appropriate just to explain in detail the harshness and the rawness of your experiences, then please include that. And reading the chapters, wow. Because if they're not sanitized, you see, if it comes to academics, what we do is we start grouping it and categorizing it. But before you know it, it's so watered down and so far removed from that which represents the true, authentic, lived experiences. And so the vision behind this book is that actually everyone who contributes the chapter is the named author of the books. Why should the academics' names go on the publications? People's careers and promotions are founded on the back of your lives and your lived experiences, and that is wrong. Meanwhile, you don't get paid for your time, and you're not getting the credit for the knowledge that you hold. That is wrong. And that's why New Central Media is here to kind of begin in its own very small way to ask a different question and to acknowledge that there are many different forms of knowledge. The academic knowledge is just one form of knowledge. Not better or worse than any other form. But we need to change that narrative in every encounter that we have, that we bring in to the room, that there are a multiplicity of ways of knowing. So, interestingly, and I'll finish with this and hand over the mic, so we've got Peter de Silva, who's going to share his experiences. Peter's contributed to the prison chapter, to the prison book. I've asked him here just to kind of share his experiences of kind of being involved in the project, and then also Aliyah, who's written a chapter in the women's book, and also Dr. Smith, obviously the chief executive of Recovery Connections. But I was fascinated when he said that this year's theme was stigma, because actually the origin story of New Central Media goes back 2 years ago when I was invited to speak at the United Nations. Go figure that. The boy from the ghetto, the council estate, the prisoner cell blockade, being invited to speak at the United Nations. And I was quaking, okay? And I was asked to speak on stigma. And this is not planned, that you've chosen this theme, you know, it's all kind of come together as it always does. And I did what any good academic would do. I looked at the studies, and I looked at the hard data, the percentages. And I put together this presentation, and I read it, and it was absolutely depressing. And I thought, I can't tell this story. Because that's the narrative that the hunter wants to be repeated. It's all negative, and it's all bleak. I know the barriers, I know the problems. So I deleted the presentation the day before I was due to fly out to the UN. So I boarded the plane to Vienna with no PowerPoint, which for an academic is like that's your security blanket. So I kind of rock up in Vienna going, okay, what story am I going to tell? And I decided to take a strengths-based approach, and I thought, what would it look like, rather than bemoaning the problem all of the time, what would it look like if we built some alternative tables? Because you see, we can spend forever and a day criticising all of the institutions and services and interventions and why the money's not coming through and why certain forms of professions aren't doing what they're supposed to do. We can do that forever and a day, and we'll still be banging our heads against the same problems as I'm sure many people in the room have been doing for decades. And I believe we're at a time in history where the people need alternative tables as a metaphor. So I believe that New Central Media is one example of an alternative table as to what a strengths-based approach can look like to challenge stigma. And it's got to disrupt the conventional ways, and it's got to ask those awkward questions. So I came across a quote when I was in my hotel room, frantically thinking, what on earth am I going to talk about, by Toni Morrison. Toni Morrison, no longer with us, she was a black African-American writer in America in the 1960s, so faced lots of kind of racial discrimination. Also being a woman, she faced lots of discrimination. And she said this, she said, I stood at the border, I stood at the edge. I stood at the edge and I claimed it as central. And I stood there and I allowed the rest of the world to come over to where I was. And that's exactly where I think that we are right now as a recovery movement. That we need to stand in our power and we need to allow the rest of the world to move over to where we are. And so my encouragement to us all, for everybody in the room, is to stand up and to speak out. Because what we need right now are new metrics, we need new methods and new measurement tools to highlight and showcase that lived experience works. I'm going to pass the mic over to Peter.
The plan wasn't 7 years later, we still talking about writing books. You know, I just wanted to get off certain drugs, get our last pack, and get home. I can't believe this is my life, you know, I am nervous, but it's alright, I'm alright with it. So when David offered, he offered me this opportunity to write a book, I couldn't believe it, you know, like me writing a book. Like I got kicked out of school at like 15, you know, I didn't really think that I was sort of writing book material, you know, but through my recovery I've faced some challenges, you know, I've challenged myself and been to uni and done some education stuff, and you know, and I thought, you know what, give it a go. And I was interested, and he told me, so I looked at it like an assignment. I asked him how many words is it, he knows what you do in an assignment, how many words is it, am I going to reference, do I have to reference, and all that academic stuff. And then he put it in words like you just said there, and he was like, you know, we've got an editing team, So we're not even bothered about your spelling, we're not bothered about your punctuation. You know, just write the story, tell us your experience at prison, if it was positive, if it was negative. Be honest, be yourself, be authentic. And that's what I did, you know. So, and then not only that, like the biggest gift from me doing this book was me and my friend who lived on the streets together, who'd done more to jail together. I've grew up with him since we were 10. I got to get him involved in the book as well. So me and him done it together, and he was sending me his drafts, I was sending him mine, and we were doing it together. And I finished first, like it was a competition. Not gonna lie. Everything has to be in competition with me. But anyway, so yeah, we done it together, and it was amazing. You know, it was a very reflective experience, going back over like the experience of prison. And you know, I have to be honest. I have to be honest. There was a lot of negatives in prison. Okay, I was talking to someone earlier on. You know, prison's prison. You're in prison. You know, so my dad used to say it's not for nourishment, it's for punishment. You know, that's what when he used to whinge and moan about it. But then I also thought, when I was writing that book, was I really ready for any sort of change? So yeah, I was blaming, because I had like a victim mentality, poor me, you know. So was I really ready? And that was food for thought. And you know, but what an experience it's been. And then when I finished the book, and David kept sending me back, which I wasn't happy about, like, looking around. You know, I got through it, I got it finished, and then they said that you're going to be like a paid published author. It's like, what does that mean? And they were like, you're going to get paid? You know, it's going to get published soon and you'll get paid. And I was like, God, it keeps giving. But then, you know, the biggest thing for me as well is that the book's going to go into prisons and go into institutions, places where I used to, you know, I spent a lot of time. And who knows, when I was down the block in solitary confinement, and then like windows of opportunity moments where I got a book like that, and I read a story like what I related to, like my own, and could it have changed the course of my path? I don't know, but it might have. You know, there's a chance, isn't there? So that's why, you know, I'm buzzing. I'm over the moon with it. Thanks for the opportunity.
PA project in Stockton. I'm quite nervous. I've just been asked like 20 minutes ago to do this. So I wrote a few notes on my phone. So when David asked me to do the book, I felt so privileged and proud to be asked to tell my story about how I overcome mental health and addiction, because I faced a lot of stigma. My story can give another vulnerable person hope and strength that recovery is possible. When I was asked, it was the first time in my life that I felt like I was listened to and heard. When writing my story, I didn't face any barriers because I was able to write it all in my own words so I could be my true self. I finally felt like I mattered and I was a part of something. I didn't need to pretend to be someone or something I'm not anymore. I feel truly blessed and grateful to be a part of Recovery Connections, because this is one of the only organisations that I've ever worked for that actually inspire you to be free and to